I'm really honored to be able to host this year's CEO panel at SIEPR with Ursula Burns of Xerox and Steve Mollenkopf from Qualcomm. We're really fortunate this year because both of these leaders are driving major transformational efforts in their $20 billion technology companies. These are organizations that both of them started their careers as engineers and now have worked their way up to become CEO. Many of us in the past have known Xerox as only a printer company. And in fact, for some of us, the term Xerox became a verb in the late 1960s. Under Ursula's leadership as CEO and chairman over the last 5 years, Xerox has been undergoing a dramatic shift in their portfolio, from hardware to now higher growth services. And I think, like me, you might be surprised as to where you'd find Xerox today, in customer call centers and in healthcare exchanges. And now, services makes up over 50% of Xerox's revenue. Ursula worked her way up from being a great math student in a pretty rough New York City housing project to getting multiple engineering degrees and then taking her first job as an intern with Xerox. Among her many accomplishments over her 35-year career at the company, the one that really stood out to me was when she led both R&D and manufacturing, which were sort of the linchpin functions in the early 2000s during Xerox's turnaround. Steve Mollenkopf took on the CEO role at Qualcomm a little bit over a year ago, but he's been with the company over 20 years. And in fact, if I calculated correctly, I think he joined about 3 years after Qualcomm went public. The story that I heard is that Steve received a newspaper advertisement in the mail from his brother when he was finishing up grad school at the University of Michigan. And it was an opportunity to move to Qualcomm. And of course, that's in San Diego. So I bet that decision to go from the cold of Michigan to the beaches of San Diego is really a tough choice. But obviously, Steve made the right one. Steve started his career as a hands-on innovator at Qualcomm. He really was one of the designers of the digital communications technology that are in the smartphones that all of us have in our purses and on the table and in our pockets today. And it's really been this phenomenal growth of mobile communications that has driven phenomenal growth for Qualcomm and also its market valuation. Today, the company is valued at close to $120 billion. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us in your busy schedules. And the way we're going to run today's panel is pretty similar to how we've done it in the past. I'll be starting off with a few questions for Ursula and Steve, and then we're going to be opening it up to the audience. So I hope that all of you are planting some ideas in your minds now about some questions to ask. So let's get right to it. As we've discussed together, the title of today's session is called The Challenge of Innovating in a Large Company. And I think for many of us here in Silicon Valley, we sort of have this point of view that all of the great innovation or the most of the innovation comes from small startups because, they can be very focused, they can identify new market opportunities, and they're super nimble to be able to go after those opportunities. But based on my experience at Cisco, if you want to stay a large, successful technology company, you have to drive internal innovation yourself. And so what I'd like to do is open it up to Ursula and Steve to share with us their perspectives on that challenge of how do you continue to innovate when you have a large existing business that you need to run profitably. So Ursula, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. It turns out it's easier than many think, particularly in a business like Xerox's business where external forces are pushing more and more change internally, where fundamentally the business that we were in, the business model that we were running would not continue to be as successful in the future as it was in the past. So what Xerox was able to do was to use these external forces and this destabilizing pressure to an advantage, not to a disadvantage. And we used it as a way to actually redefine innovation, to actually broaden the definition and remove it from only a research or development type of activity, innovating business models, innovating alliances, innovating just about everything that we do. So to broaden the definition of innovation and include more people into it. And actually to take risks, some big risks, because that were not big risks when you think about it, because the status quo would have eventually just meant that we would be out of business or in a significantly smaller segment of the market, significantly less impactful, and stranding some of the assets that we had. So we used the time that we were living in and the time that we're currently living in as a catalyst to actually disrupt everything and to try to innovate. So it was actually easier for us than staying the status quo.
Yeah.
What's going to happen over time, though, is that as we make this change, you said it, more than half of our revenues now come from services. We're in everything from traffic management to customer care to government health infrastructure. It's all over the world and doing that fairly well. That's going to also move to a point where we're pretty comfortable as well, and people will be pressuring us from the outside to do things differently, either because they can do it cheaper or because customers want more, and that it's going to continue to drive this innovation engine. So we actually, I think like most companies, had no place to kind of rest our laurels, so we absolutely had to change. And it was people always say to me, Ursula, you had a brilliant leader. I said, no, not. We had very few choices, right? And when you have few choices, change is very easy. So.
Great. Steve, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd say for us, it was really about culture. I think the great thing about startups is that they number one, they have no other choice but to innovate. But they take these, they just take so many bets. I mean, venture capital really just means there's a lot of bets laid out there. When you're a big company, you have to make sure that you kind of replicate that culture to the degree that you can. And risk taking is very important. For us, we try not to have a lot of structure. And structure is one of the things that big companies add in that sort of remove their choices or degrees of freedom and things. So we try not to put too much in there. And it's really important, I think, for you to be able to also not penalize or dwell on the mistakes. People, you have to make mistakes. You're going to definitely fail, and you don't want to spend all your time celebrating the failures. And sometimes the key part of culture is that you can ignore the failures, and you just kind of keep telling yourself that you're doing a good job. And so the interesting thing for Qualcomm is that the businesses that they're in today were not the businesses that they thought they were going to be in. And the rate at which we had to change what we were good at was actually quite fast. It was probably on a 2 or 3 or 4 year cycle that you had to constantly, what you were really good at had to change. And I don't think that changes. It probably gets faster now in the way the economy works.
I was just going to follow up on that because Qualcomm has faced a few headwinds, recently in terms of, this projected slowdown in terms of mobile devices and the growth there and the emergence of the Chinese semiconductor manufacturers. So how do you sort of apply your philosophy to the immediate term?
Well, I think for someone who's been at the company a long time, the number of times that people said this is the last year that you're going to have a good business is amazing. It's probably 20 years, which is how long I've been there. Including when we first did CDMA, there was a professor actually at Stanford who said that CDMA wouldn't work. Actually, it defied the laws of physics. And so
we won't name that professor right now.
Well, actually, it was. We used to have this joke, which is, I guess it works everywhere in the world except for the Stanford campus. So, but
that was an internal Qualcomm joke.
It was.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
It actually was primarily done by someone from MIT, actually. So I can't claim it. But I guess what happens is you're constantly up against something like that. And the thing to remember is that if you don't kind of eat your own lunch, someone else will. So we had to bet on new technologies. Sometimes we actually had public statements that this technology was not going to work. But in reality, we were working with $100 million programs to make sure that if it did work, we would be the leader. And I think that's what most companies have to do, or what they do to keep themselves relevant.
It's interesting, the external prognostications about your company and external statements when you're working in a company, if you listen to them, you could actually just do nothing, or actually just be totally schizophrenic, right? So I think part of the thing that business leaders do is, that can also be dangerous, is to totally shut them out, right? So either side is not good because there are so many noises, and you can actually compartmentalize those noises into ignorance or just not understanding the internal mechanisms. So you shut them out, and that's one, or you listen to them. And what CEOs, what businesses do in general is there's this natural, daily, external measure of the worth of your company. This is what people say, that oftentimes you wake up in the morning. I know Steve does this. He and I spend time together outside of this kind of environment in another environment. You wake up in the morning and there's a message that tells you that you were terrible yesterday. And then by the time you end that day, you were told that you were great. And interestingly enough, you did nothing. So
So you're talking about the stock price?
Yeah, stock price, or whatever the prognostications are. And so this idea that you need to actually think of your company as like a living, growing, learning, changing being is really true. It sounds so comical and kind of trite, but it is the way that you keep yourself sane. Because if you measured it on any given day, you would actually think you were very powerful or very dumb, or one of the two.
So following up on this culture point, later today, Larry Baer from the San Francisco Giants is going to speak, and one of the things he talks about as being the reasons why the Giants have done so well as a sports organization has been this selfless culture, and he talks about the role of culture. And so I was thinking about at Xerox. I mean, the company's been around for, 100 and something years.
75.
75, okay. So how do you, obviously the culture evolves, but how do you think about managing the culture, especially as you're trying to drive these changes? And I imagine the culture has to evolve with that.
Yes, for sure. And I think, it took me a while to realize that who I am, since I am temporary, right? This company's been around for a lot longer than I'm there, and it will hopefully last for a long time. It took me a while to realize how much power who I am has on defining or tweaking or changing or destroying, building up a culture. And so I'm the kind of the id and the ego of the company. And I build a team around me, and they build a team, and they build a team that kind of accentuates the things that we want to last for a long time, and tries to dampen the things that are not really valuable to us. They can't really wipe them out, and so our culture is all around. I always say to our people that we actually carry our own bags. We are a fairly blue-collar company. Every single person in our company works and brings value. We are fearless. We have to move, and you have to have a voice about things. You have to obviously be excellent. This is not about hiring. We all hire the best people in the world from schools all over the world, and they're good. But when they walk in the door, they have to actually kind of act like Xerox people. So what's a Xerox person? Right? You have to be fearless. You have to have a voice. You absolutely have to act. This idea that not moving is equivalent to moving. People don't quite understand that. And that you literally have to be able to be a good practitioner and fail really fast. Innovation, curiosity, literally working very hard. This idea that we have brilliant people, but brilliance is not enough. Brilliance is not enough. Customer centricity. So all of these kind of really passionate, great words. And the way that we actually do it at Xerox is you've got to live it every single day. You have to literally go out and work. You have to spend time with customers. You have to spend time with employees. You have to carry the weight of your pay every single day. And we're paid a lot, so there's a lot of weight.
Is there one thing you wish you could change about how your employees either think about Xerox or how they interact? One thing you're like, if I could just shut that down, that would make a huge difference.
I think the biggest thing for me is that actually people think that somebody else will save them. Every employee thinks that there's someone up there who's going to change their work and make it better. And it's one of the things I preach continuously. We have a small cabinet at the head of Xerox. It's like 8 or 9 people. We have 140,000 people in the company. Right. And these 8 or 9 people don't see 140,000 people hardly ever, right? Yeah. So the idea that most of the value that's created in the company is created by these 140,000 people kind of individually, not with this, we're not yelling to them, by the way, turn right, move faster, fix this problem, take on this initiative. It's really, I am on it all the time. You have to kind of own and feel as though the failure that you can create in the local thing is worth the effort. You know, it's worth the risk of success
Yeah.
is worth the effort
Yeah,
of moving,
yeah,
right? So
exactly.
it's a big deal.
Interesting. So I thought we'd shift a little bit to, we've just been talking about the global economy before lunch and then talking about Brazil more recently. And so, Steve, I thought I might pose a question to you about China. There's been a little bit of, news about Qualcomm in China. For those of you that aren't aware, Qualcomm just settled a suit or a deal, I guess, with the Chinese government where you're going to be paying $975 million. And this is related to royalties that Chinese mobile phone manufacturers have been paying to the company. I know this was sort of hanging over the company's head for a while. I believe about half of your revenue come from China. It was also announced a couple weeks ago that Cisco, Apple, Intel, and others were removed from China's state purchase list. So, China, obviously, as we've talked about, is a huge opportunity for all of us in tech companies, but it's certainly not easy doing business there. So, sort of what's your sense of it, and what's your feeling about your advice, I guess, for tech companies as we move forward in working with the country?
Sure. China's obviously a large end market, and in the case of our business, it tends to be proportional to the number of people, because most people in the world either have or will have a cell phone or some connected device, hopefully multiple connected devices, over the course of their life, and certainly over the next decade. And so China has a lot of people. But more importantly, they have a very significant place in the supply chain of devices that are sold worldwide. And that's not just in the handset industry, but it's also true in the electronics industry broadly. And they have a tremendously engineered supply chain around the creation of all these things. And it gives them a lot of influence worldwide. And so for us, we had an investigation really about the way in which we conduct business in China. And we resolved that by paying the fine that you mentioned, is $975 million. But it enabled us to grow our business into what is the largest market in the world. And so if you look at the size of the largest cellular carrier in China, it's China Mobile. It's about 800 million subscribers. It'll be about 900 million subscribers in 2018. Verizon and AT&T roughly in the low 100 million in the United States, and will grow to be about 130, something like that, over that same time frame. So the scale is enormous. And so you have to, in a business like ours, you have to participate in it. Mm-hmm. And you can't withdraw from it like some folks have. So you're forced to figure out how to do that. And so what we did was we have a kind of a broad range of technologies and interfaces to the local Chinese economy. And we essentially firmed up some of those, and we also reminded folks how that works. Meaning, the Chinese government is a very large organization, and so how you navigate through it, how you connect one portion where you have a very high partnering quotient, I guess,
right.
And how you connect that one to the other one is sort of the beauty of doing business in China. But a lot of places in the world are complicated to do business. It's just that in China you can't afford not to participate. There are also things that U.S.-based companies need to be very, very careful about, and this didn't hit us directly, but you're sort of guilt by association, which is the whole privacy issue and how people trust their products is a very important global issue for people. Particularly people in our industries. I know Ursula has the same issue. When you're dealing with people's data and you're dealing with people's effectively their lives and how they share information, people need to be, and countries need to be very, very careful about how they do that, so that the consumer or certain places in the world don't get uncomfortable with the use of those products.
So you're more optimistic about China right now, obviously, with this behind you?
Yeah, for us, we've been doing business there for 15 years, and it's been a great place. We have great partnerships there, and we kind of got through this period, and we're probably better positioned there, not just with our business, but also with personal relationships and partnerships than ever before. And if you look at the history of our company, we had these situations where you had to go through something like that. There were these big events that occurred, and you can work through them. The key, though, is that you need to make sure you have some technology that other people need, and which is just saying innovation continues to be important.
Right.
And that is the core of really all value creation in negotiation or companies or anything. If you don't have that, then you're done.
If you don't have that, you don't even get, particularly in China, you don't even get a seat at the table.
That's right.
I mean, they don't even let you in. So.
So to keep sort of on the global theme, Ursula, you mentioned I think you have 140,000 employees and I guess 160 countries you're in, or it's probably more than that. And
No, only 160.
Only 160. Okay. Only 160. And so there's this whole idea about as you move, especially into emerging countries. We talked about Brazil, risks associated with that, Russia, and others. So where do you think about placing your big bets right now from a country-by-country basis? And then how do you think about managing the risks associated with some of those countries?
Interestingly enough, one of our biggest bets is in the United States. Our employment in the U.S. is growing. Some of it by requirement, by regulation, based on how states bid on work. If you happen to be the benefactor of a state winning a state bid, then you're almost surely going to have lots of employees in the state. And we are betting more and more in Africa, which is an interesting place. We had a huge site in Ghana, kind of a specialty delivery site in Ghana, and brought the size down, and now are growing it up again. Pretty good skills, pretty good language capabilities, and as you chase cost around the world, Africa is turning out to be an interesting place to go. So there's no place that we're running away from. As skills grow around the world, we are participating because we have end markets everywhere. We almost are participating with employment just about everywhere. I'm surprised at some of the strength of the U.S. though, in how we're hiring there and how it continues to, by choice, make it a good option for me to hire there. The market in the U.S. is also one of the best that we can see around the world.
So just a follow-up to that, what's your sort of view on the U.S. economy and the future of it? I mean, obviously there's some challenges in Asia and Europe, and
it's amazingly resilient. These are political words. I spend a lot of time in Washington, so it's amazingly resilient. Actually, it is very strong. Europe has its challenges and its problems. Asia as well, obviously, Latin, all growing, all good. But the U.S. over time has been the most consistent profit expanding market for us. I think it could be better, a lot better. I think we're leaving a lot on the table, a lot of money on the table. Trade policy, tax policy, definitely better cyber policy, immigration policy would actually make this this measly 2.5% GDP growth that we have, or whatever the number is right now, probably even better than that. But even with all the headwinds that we have, most of them I think self-created headwinds, business is able to kind of maneuver its way around it and actually have a good footing. Innovation is at the key of that, by the way, the center of it.
And on that topic, one of the things you've spoken about before, Steve, is this new evolving innovation or capability, which is, I think you're calling it the edge of the internet. I think some folks around here might call it the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything. I think we have Gartner projecting in 6 or 7 years that we're going to have 500 plus internet-connected devices in our homes. Can you sort of bring this down to earth for us and explain, like, what is it? What does it mean in terms of business opportunities for firms like yours? And then for us as consumers, how are we going to see this play out over the next 5 or 10 years?
Sure. So it's funny, the Internet of Everything is the term that a lot of companies use to define the next thing. But then you ask them exactly what it is, that they have a difficult time saying exactly what it is. But for us, the way I look at it is, if you look at just think about it, how the Internet will change over time. Kind of the first wave of the Internet was you had something on your desk, and there were some winners and losers there, and you did a lot of transactions through the browser, and there was Office and a number of things. Fantastic value creation in the world. There were big companies that emerged out of that. And there were actually whole economies that came out of there. I mean, Google is a great example of the relationship between information on the internet at that phase. Then you get to mobile, and the internet basically got to your pocket. So it's on your desk, now it's on your pocket. And you had things like the smartphone, you had all the networks to deliver that, and then you had kind of a whole bunch of an economy based off of applications that took advantage of the fact that you were mobile and no longer on your desk. So you could do things like Uber, you could do things like Facebook and camera sharing of pictures and Twitter. These are things that are just inherently provided or enabled because the internet is now mobile and walking around. Well, at some point, the internet extends not just to your pocket, but to about 100 things at the same time around you. And someone will monetize the relationship between data and the things that are going. So part of what we try to do as a company is enable the industry to grow along each one of those transitions, actually. So what we try to do is make it very easy for people and new companies to connect their devices to the internet, either through a phone or directly, to the internet. When that happens, I think they open up a tremendous amount of opportunity for people to create new businesses. And one of the areas I'm personally interested in was mentioned earlier today, which is mobile health. I mean, if you look at the healthcare and the amount of data that we have on things, so on a car, let's think about how much data you have on a car and contrast that with the amount of data that you have about your own personal health or your kids' health or what have you. And then you say, how much money do we spend as an economy on healthcare delivery? But we haven't really seen the same sort of technological efficiency gains that you would see if Moore's Law came to
Healthcare.
Providing data off of people. And so I think that's a tremendous opportunity for developed economies to work there. For a company like ours, what does that mean? It means that you have to solve the privacy problem, you have to solve the delivery of data, you have to enable companies that are not good at getting connected to the internet and dealing with mobility, make it so it's very easy for them to get on the internet. And that's what we're trying to do as an enabler. But if we can do that, I think there'll be just a tremendous amount of opportunity for people to do it. And they think about it along the lines of, there's a thing, and I'm going to make the thing. But it's really about, what can I do with the data that came off the thing? And what is it that I have to do to the underlying networks in order to provide that capability? And for us, we call that kind of what's going to evolve at the edge of the internet. And it seems like there's a lot of opportunity. And I hope that that we're one of the companies that contributes there, because whoever figures this out first will export it worldwide. And this is where the U.S. has a tremendous advantage because of just the scale. You have 300 million plus people, and these are at-scale problems to figure out. And if you can figure that out, then you will export it to all the other economies, and that's why we're excited about it.
Ursula, in terms of providing services, you must start to think about cybersecurity and security issues. And I've been reading through a bunch of draft 10Ks of companies lately, and cybersecurity is like in the top of the risk factors now. And so how do you think about both protecting your customers' data, but also your own internal IP and data?
It's, it's core and critical and key. And one of the things that you talked about at the beginning is that people wouldn't think about what Xerox does. We did printing, and that's pretty cool, but we manage health infrastructures for states. California, we do it for California, for New York. So we have the data around many, many, many lives in the United States. We manage traffic safety infrastructures for many, many states, educational infrastructures. So data, the information that we have is important. Being able to actually manipulate it and then use it to monetize our business growth and to actually increase effectiveness is one of the major challenges that we have. And cyber is one of the, cyber and security around cyber is one of the biggest challenges that we face. We have some headwinds for sure, because there is this desire to get more output, to get more efficient, to do more, while you have this desire to actually, of everyone, for people to know less about them. So they want all of the good stuff that you can possibly get about knowing about them, with none of the knowledge about knowing about them. And it's a is a big deal. But I do believe that it is a challenge, but one that we're going to have to be able to address. There's a lot of work between industry and Washington and many, many private sector players, universities, et cetera, that are trying to be able to actually balance this information about the specific information about you, providing specific value to you, but also affording you the privacy that you want. This is not perfect yet, but I think it's going to be able to go. Everyone's going to have to give a little. Everyone's going to have to be able to give a little bit for this to happen. We had some, Snowden didn't help. It didn't help. It didn't help us inside the United States. It didn't help us outside the United States. It didn't help us with regulators. It didn't help us anywhere. But over time, I think it's almost like a wave that eventually you'll realize that it happened to you. It happened to you before you'll be able to stop it.
Hopefully before I have a problem.
But I think that they're going to be problems.
Yeah.
They're going to be big problems. I just say keep your life not interesting, then you'll be okay.
Well, I wanted to move to the diversity topic that Steve raised at the beginning, and I'm actually going to give this question. I'm sorry that the diversity topic that as the introduction was made, as that topic came up, I'm actually going to ask Steve to answer the question, and I'm sure that Ursula and I will jump right in with our comments on it. But
Steve, we're watching.
But
Not just you, by the way.
We are aware that we want to increase diversity. We're aware we want to increase diversity in technology companies. We know the problem as it relates to pipeline. As I was saying to you, I've been whispering in my daughter's ears software engineering since the time they were born, and neither one of them majored in engineering in college. So I myself have failed. But Intel now is announced that they're investing $300 million to, I guess, what they're calling get to full representation of women and minorities by 2020. So what do you think about that? What do you think are the things that we can be doing, across the board as both educators, folks in business, et cetera, to really have a more diverse workforce, which we all know results in better products, better customer service, et cetera?
I mean, also you access a very large population that you're not
Right.
accessing is a very practical issue. But so I think it's really a big issue from the pipeline perspective. Everyone talks about this. Everybody's subjected to it. Everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with it, and I think everyone's unsatisfied with the progress so far. I mean, we're certainly that way. And we have programs where we bring people in at the kind of middle school level, because that's where you lose people. You lose them at the middle school level. And you get them excited about building robots or doing code. They just basically get an experience and they figure out that it's something that's interesting. The problem is, if you look, the trends are actually quite poor. They're actually getting worse versus getting better, even though we have all of these, real... There are people that are essentially celebrities because they're celebrities in tech, yet the pipeline is actually going the other direction. And I think everybody's working on that, and my guess is that will work, but that's going to be a decade before you start to see that even show up in the middle levels of organizations. So I think get people in the door, get people excited about it. We all should be doing that. But one of the problems is when you have people already in the company, how do you get them successful? How do you make sure they're successful? And for us, it's a little bit goes against this comment I made earlier about having a lot of structure. So if you don't have a lot of structure and you're constantly innovating like a startup, how do you make sure that people get ahead? And in a company like ours, getting the right assignments is key. And it ends up, or at least our perspective, and you always have to be careful kind of giving the man's perspective on this problem. And I've been educated a lot by this, including my own daughters, that what I at least take away from it is men and women are socialized differently, and by and large, the project assignments tend to be done in a way that rewards the men's socialization. So you have to kind of go in and make sure, hey, did we get this person? Did we encourage this person to speak? Did we get all those things? And I think that is an important component at kind of the grassroots level of what will get people to move up. The broad sort of awareness, everyone's aware actually at this point. It's just how do we make sure that people kind of move ahead? And it is a, you know, a thing everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with, and I think we're not making as much progress as we should be happy with.
Well, you're right about the socialization. You know, my experience as a manager was that during performance reviews, the men would always come in general, assuming they had done a lot better than they had actually done.
Yeah.
And the women would always, I would be spending the whole time, no, you really did great. Seriously, you did a phenomenal job. So, again, generalizations you can't go by, but it is.
Can I give you an interesting stat that I learned at the Grace Hopper event, which in fact it was a lady who was a CTO of a small company. She told me that if you look at, I might have this wrong, but if you look at men or boys, by the time they're 18, something like they've failed at 30 things that they really, truly cared about. They want to try to do something, they try to get on a team or whatever, and they failed. It's 30 things. What do you think the equivalent number is for women, same age?
No, half
it's
that.
3.
Oh.
It's 3. Because what you find is people self-select. And I see this in my own family. People will self-select and not go into this thing because they didn't think that they could do it. When in reality, the opposite is true, and if you look. And so I think you have to look, as a manager, you have to look out for those things and encourage people. And that the review process is too late. Because typically, getting a good review meant I'm in the right assignment. And if I'm in the right assignment, then I got a chance to display my expertise. And that's where I think people should spend time and say, hey, make sure that happens.
Ursula?
Yeah, I actually, you didn't do poorly.
Okay, excellent.
I'm impressed. That's really good.
But I think there's going to be a lecture coming, I have a feeling.
But.
Yeah, there's a but yeah. I do believe that there is absolutely a socialization pipeline, for sure. But I think it's there, and that's one that will take time to fix, primarily because you don't get an engineer in a day. It takes you, 20 years to build one, probably. But I do believe that there's another set of really immediate things that we can fix that are amazing to me, that even Xerox, we have 2 women who led the company in the last 10 years, 15 years. We still have fundamental challenges. We are a biased society. We actually walk into rooms, and if you see a woman, you assume that she can do certain things. And if you see a man, you assume that he can do certain things. If you see a black woman or a black man or an Asian, we are biased. And I think that we have to actually recognize that and just say that we are, and then literally fight against it every day. We have this thing at Xerox that every single job that's at a certain level, this is very painful for my staff, every job at a certain level has to have what we call a diverse set of qualified candidates, right? So if you want to head to be the chief marketing officer, the guy retires, and they come in and they tell me, here are the candidates. There are 5 of them, and one of them is a woman. And you'll hold that job up for, and you try this, you hold this job up for 6 months trying to find the right mix of people. And if you do it, and you're really focused on it, you actually will find the right mix. You will often hire the man, but at least you will train yourself to actually broaden where you look. We are a biased people. This room is a great example of it. I mean, there are not only men economists in the world, but there seem like there are only men economists in the world.
We had that conversation at our advisory board meeting yesterday.
And so I just think it's one of these things that it's the pipeline. One of the things when we get to the point where we're feeling really good and we are less biased or whatever, however you confront that, would then go out there and find out the pipeline is not full, is not enough. But I don't even think that we're actually getting to that point yet. No. If it were just a pipeline problem, I would love it. And it is a pipeline problem, but even for highly qualified, highly skilled jobs today, that there are enough people, we don't look far enough to get them. We don't take enough quote-unquote risk. We have a model of what success looks like, or what past successful look like, and you say, well, I want to get one of those. Women just don't generally have that set of experiences. So you're going to have to actually change your whole approach and say, well, she got the degree, she worked somewhere, and she didn't blow up the place, so we're going to take a quote-unquote a chance at it. And when it's going to become absolutely necessary. And when it becomes absolutely necessary, for what Steve said, we just are running out of, we're giving birth, we're running out of white men.
Right.
And there will be a point where you're
Reminds me
going to
of
have
that
to...
song. You know, it's raining
So
men.
it is frustrating, but it is also... It's also something to work on. You know, I mean, it's an inspirational thing to work on.
It's interesting because I've met a woman who runs a search firm, and she only searches for female candidates for boards of directors. And at first I thought, wow, this is weird. We're going to do an exclusionary process to create an inclusionary board, right? But it is amazing when I have seen the candidates that she has come up with that just no one knows. They've never been a buddy of somebody or no, you know, in a certain circle, and it's really changed my mind on that particular example.
It's interesting. My middle name is John, by the way.
Oh,
Because I read that same, I only read the headline, I didn't read the whole article, and you know, it's another way of pointing out the same problem, that we don't have diverse participation in the opportunities. And in order to get that, we're going to have to jump through some steps. And we may have to have, I think unfortunately, but we may have to have around the world regulation. The European, you have to have a certain, those things are not sustainable over time. But if you try everything else and it fails, then you get to the point where you say, well, we're going to regulate this. And you may not get the best, but you'll get the motor starting a little bit. You know, you'll get this flywheel kind of moving a little bit. I'm hoping that we don't have to get there here in this country, because I don't believe it's the methodology that's sustainable. But
well, that's a good warning to all of us out there.
including me. I mean,
Yeah, all of us.
including me.
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
the
you know, we
company,
got to
so-
fight for it every day. Just to stay sort of on the workforce-related issues, there's going to be a critical issues session later today on the millennials.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in our generation, the idea of building a career at one company or a handful of companies was sort of the way that you thought you were going to advance. Now we've got younger people who, you know, think they're going to stay in a job for maybe 3 years because, you know, that's the way to learn and get broad experiences. So how do you think about building your workforce and then retaining your workforce when you've got, you know, potential employees who don't see the world as we did?
You know, it's funny. We don't see that trend so sharply, meaning that we don't see this exodus after 3 years or 5 years because of people wanting to say it's time to move on. You do see it, and you see it along all the title lines. If you're not having people work on interesting things, the thing that I think is the key to retention is, do people have a sense of mission, and do they feel what they're working on is important? Now, I think there are certain age groups, certain groups of people that are highly attuned to that. So, for example, you know, the collaboration, and I want to work on a big problem, and I want to be part of something that touches everyone's lives. There are certain age groups that's more important than others. But it ends up that most of the good businesses are actually in alignment with something that touches everyone's life, at least certainly what we work on. So I think that tends to be more of what it is about. Also, the way in which recruitment happens is completely different now in the age of LinkedIn and all of these things. You're not going to prevent people from having from knowing about what's going on. It's not the whole this person sent an email to our employee, let's make sure that doesn't happen, stop the pipe from happening, because they're going to know about everything.
Right.
So you have to make sure that you have an engaging workforce and you're working on interesting things, and not prevent knowledge of the opportunity. So that we spend most of our time making sure that we're working on something of the proper scale than anything, I would say.
I so agree with that. We don't really see that trend. Clearly, there's different requirements, expectations, or things that are interesting to different generations. But this rush towards the door is not something that happens after 3 years, 5 years. I think part of it has to do with I was thinking about this with my team in DC when we were in DC the other day. Part of it is some people probably self-select themselves out of working for a big corporation before they walk in the door. So maybe that's the reason why we don't see it. Maybe. I don't know. But we don't see this, you know, they've been here 3 years and they feel compelled to run away. Literally, if you have a great job for them.
A good manager.
A good manager is number one, right? And if you can market yourself as a company that has impact, and do what you normally do. Most big corporations, most corporations, I'm sure, but most companies, I'm sure, but most big corporations have just a wealth of opportunity for people to actually have varied experience. It's amazing. Live all over the world, literally live around the world, serve in community activities, literally redesign how society works and lives. And these kinds of things are the things that really compel people to stay and be engaged in that. So people leave for sure, but it's not generally because they're saying, my God, I've been here too long. I feel, it's year 5, I've been here too long, I should be looking for something else. If they have a bad manager, they'll leave almost immediately, by the way. Almost immediately.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, Ursula, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So for those of you that are interested, you can start looking for the mics. You've talked quite a bit about being in Washington, running into Steve in Washington, and I think it was in 2010 that you were appointed by President Obama to be vice chair of the President's Export Council. I think you were recently in Turkey and Poland on behalf of that council. What do you think, maybe if we leave it broad, what do you think the U.S. government could be doing, either in the U.S. or with our trading partners, to help U.S. firms be more competitive?
Yeah, I mean, the number of things, unfortunately, are many. But I'll stop and I'll bucket them in three areas. By the way, the President's Export Council, as a lead into this answer, is probably one of the most interesting things, interesting and useful thing. It is the most interesting and useful thing that I actually do in Washington. It's fun and informative and impactful. So we can actually have some speaking with the government partners and trading partners, and then having policy made that actually aligns to that has been pretty interesting and good. Opening up trade, the ability to trade easily for small and mid-sized businesses in the United States is one of the most important things that we can do to increase trade. Because big companies get it. And if they don't know how to do it, they'll learn really quick and run through just about any door. The unbelievable growth in small and mid-sized companies in the United States, which is where most of the employment growth is coming from, which is where just about all of the total revenue growth, industrial revenue growth is coming from, is what we need to actually enable. And that's something that is very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do because there's not a natural infrastructure in the government or in any real community. Like I said, companies know how to do it because we just figure, we hire, we figure it out, spend money to figure it out. Small companies don't have the ability to do that and to navigate, just a myriad of things they have to be able to do to get around. So enabling that, there's a whole bunch of work trying to make sure that we can connect smaller companies to either bigger companies that can help them with our supply chains to trade, or connecting them to governments or countries directly. Having a trade policy that makes sense would be also good. So this idea that we're going to actually go into negotiations without trade promotion authority is an interesting idea, right? So we're going to sit down, Poland, Turkey, and the United States, and the guy who's negotiating from the United States has to continue to go out the room and call the president to see, or Congress to see.
Larry Summers was right.
I mean, it's just insane. So there are certain things that I'm not going to speak about because they are so stupid. And I don't mean that, they're so obviously wrong,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
that you just have to assume that eventually they're going to get fixed. Because if they don't get fixed, then this whole thing kind of implodes on itself, right? So you have to have a set of trade policies and a method of trading that makes sense. And we had it in the past. We kind of lost our way a little bit, or getting into a fight that has nothing to do with that. So we have to fix that. Outside of that, opening it up for small and mid-sized companies is really big. And then having trade agreements that make sense. And we're structuring trade agreements all the time on paper. We have them. And companies, China has signed, 11, and we signed 0. We signed 4 2 years ago. So literally, you have to actually engage in a sensible way with people who are sitting across the table trying to do exactly what you're trying to do, right, to your detriment. They're not trying to kill you, they're just trying to get an upper hand, which is basically what we would be trying to do. So this is this idea that there are 300 million people in this country that depend on smart decision makers to enable them to have a better life. And we have to make sure that we keep pushing on those decision makers to make sure that we can enable all these people to have a better life. Right? And trade is one of the fundamentals. Another thing that we can do, and this is to all of you in the room, we have to actually convince people that trade is good. Many people in the United States actually believe that free trade is a job robber in the United States. We spend all of our time in Washington, Steve and I and other tech CEOs, explaining that that is just wrong. And you have a whole set of parties that believe that that's true. You have a set of parties that believe that's true, elected officials that believe that that's true, and unfortunately we have people around the United States that believe that that's true. And net, there's not one fact that lines up with that. Every single fact is contrary to that. And so trade is a really big deal. Innovation is a big deal. I mean, so it's a big ecosystem of things that you have to get done. So.
Could I add a few things to that?
Sure,
I think the thing to remember, too, is that people talk about company being XYZ as an American company or a German company. But actually what they do is they optimize for the entire world.
That's what we do.
Given the global set of constraints. And, you know, we churn out tremendous talent that knows how to do this. And so people move to the incentive system. The fact that there's some unusual situation that exists, people just move the resources somewhere else.
Right.
So, and companies have to do that. If they don't do that, they won't succeed. So you have to, number one, you have to pay attention to that. Immigration and tax are the two, and people are tired of us talking about it, but it is a big issue. We have a lot of money stranded from the U.S. economy because of tax policy, and it needs to eventually get figured out. And then the one that I think people don't talk about enough, which is a key component of our success, is the U.S. University system. And we have such a unique university system. You know, we train the best people in the world, and we don't keep them. And we have to make sure that we continue to be able to train them forever, because that is not something that resonates with the political timeline. I mean, you're investing in something that has a payoff 2 or 3 administrations down the line. But we've benefited from that immensely as technology companies. And when you lobby in that area, boy, it's hard to get traction.
Well, we're all worried about the UCs out here, that's for sure.
Yeah, so trade, tax, immigration, definitely educational infrastructure. And that's a lot of the time that we spend in Washington is around those things.
Well, our next president is going to have a full plate, that's for sure. So maybe we won't have to get into that discussion right now, but so maybe some questions from the audience. Does someone want to start? I think right here in the middle. A little difficult to get to, but...
Ursula, didn't happen on your shift, but because you're there as the CEO of Xerox and we're talking about innovation, what is the learning that is the inside Xerox story about not allowing Xerox PARC to happen again?
Well, we spend quite a bit of time how do I say this? We spend quite a bit of time celebrating what Xerox PARC is now. Versus looking at what happened to Xerox PARC before. So what Xerox PARC is now is this unbelievable innovation area for Fortune 500 companies around the world, for small companies and for the government and for Xerox. And so what we've done with Xerox PARC, which is probably in response to what happened years ago, is to actually contain it and then loosen it, if you know what I mean. So contain it in a way that says that there is a magic there that our infrastructure doesn't really mess with too much. It's a little bit to what Steve was saying. So not a lot of rules here, not a lot of oversight here. There's a great leader and a methodology. And then what we did was we actually spun it out of the company. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Xerox. It has an open innovation engine. It has a P&L that is almost like a startup P&L. They have to invest and make money back. And we've allowed them to actually be a little bit more, we've allowed them to be a lot less like Mother Xerox in the ways that would be negative, and a lot more like PARC in the ways that would be positive. The other thing that we've done is we've actually replicated it in 2 other sites around the world. We have an amazing Park Europe in a place called Grenoble in France, and then we have Park India as well. And that's been able to kind of keep the people juvenated and excited about it. So it's a real big strength for Xerox right now, and I want to make sure that we keep it that way by continuing to morph the model and allowing them to continue to be innovative and not so directed from us on what they do. And that's, I think, the strength. I'm not really sure, or nor did I spend a lot of time focusing on what happened 25 or however many years ago it was. As I said, I think we have a model now that works, and so let's continue to grow from that point forward.
Next question, there's a couple over here.
Yeah, I would like to know how you identify, encourage, and reward and retain innovators in a large company.
So Steve, maybe we can
The
start
first
with you.
one is identify, but then there's the other parts of it too.
Sure. I think in general, innovation is something that happens everywhere in the company. That's first of all. I think most people, and you have to encourage that to occur. We tend to celebrate our innovators really through patents. We make a big deal of patents. Patents for us represent at least some quanta of innovation. And so we spend a lot of time rewarding people and celebrating people's patents, or that's the sort of the formal version of it. We have a formal innovation program. We have a number of things, but I think engagement with the senior management team directly with the people that are doing the innovation and actually participating in the process, we tend to do a lot of. We also, there's a reason why people reward people with equity compensation. It is also a way that rewards people for adding value, and if you believe that innovation is the thing that adds value as a company, it aligns what they're doing. And so we've done that historically as a means. And we, for example, on our business cards, if you have a certain number of patents, you can have a little stamp that says you're an innovator. And just very small things like that create a culture of, hey, it's important, that innovation's important. And, it works, actually.
Inspect, big deal. So have a process. Inspect, I agree on this patent thing. We are really around making sure that we celebrate success in this area. But we're actually trying to, because we are a business process company, a lot of the innovation that happens, we kept funneling innovation down to this thing that's called labs or engineers or scientists. And that, by the way, we need that. And we now have that running very well. And what we found out was that we needed innovation in process and methods of doing business almost as much as we need innovation in from a technological standpoint. And so we're really kind of, we're putting a lot of energy behind that and trying to learn a lot about that. So if you think of something like, Steve said it earlier, LinkedIn, or these dating sites, and you think about, it's an innovation that is, it's enabled by technology, but the technology is not the thing. It's the whole process by which you would think about how do you figure out a way to meet somebody differently, right? And these are the kinds of things that we're actually trying to put an engine behind. But it literally is about celebrate people. You inspect if you inspect what you expect, you get things. If you celebrate what you expect, you get a whole bunch of energy behind it. So it's the basic, management things. You put a shine light on it. You actually celebrate it when it's really going well. And you call it when it's not going well and make changes in that way. It's a big deal.
I'm looking forward to that Xerox dating site.
Yeah, no, we're not into the dating sites. Yeah.
Another question? Yes.
You two have done a very good job of discussing this from what seems to me to be the standpoint of a 30,000-foot viewpoint of a chief executive of a very large organization. I happen to have known some of the people involved in one of your organizations very well. Both organizations began with technological innovations, very disruptive innovations, particularly in the case of Xerox. Ursula, you've described what you're doing now as essentially, it sounds to me more like IBM's moving into more of service situations. Granted, these are big jobs, and you have the capability to undertake them. I would ask you both if you're really trying to do innovations in the devices area, such as both your companies started with. Are you starting working in that area? And or have you evolved away from that and feel that the device areas is relatively mature and that you've got to move into these other, basically not so technical markets?
Well, I'll start. I mean, absolutely not moving away from innovation in the devices area, in the things area. We still spend, between ourselves and our partners in Japan, over $1 billion in research in the thing area, in three areas primarily. One is 3D printing. We actually have a strength in heads in 3D printing, and we market them to the 3D printing companies, and it's a business that's still just starting. I mean, nobody's quite made money yet, but everybody needs heads, and we have to actually perfect them to be able to move through these heads or to shoot many, many different types of substrates and things. So we're spending quite a bit of money there. A large amount of money in high-speed imaging still, particularly in high-quality marketing-based materials, which is still the area of the market, what we call graphic communications, that's growing pretty amazingly. And interestingly, the third area is in using imaging to manage infrastructures around the world, cities, particularly roadways. So all of our copying imaging, for example, is used now. If you go over to Henry Hudson Parkway in New York City, I know none of you actually do New York City, because if you're here, you don't have to go to New York City. But in New York City, it's called transponderless tolling, or transponderless road, high occupancy vehicle management. So we're still investing quite a bit of money in imaging, in 3D printing, and in other areas to keep moving along. The other $500 million that we spend is in process engineering. So, but we're still very, very heavily weighted towards innovation in devices, as you call it.
I think for us, we fundamentally bet on technology. So our original big move in the company came because we invented a technology that made digital communications much more efficient. And what we ended up doing was, at that point, we had to do everything. We had to build the base stations, we had to build the devices, we had to build the chipsets, we had to do all these things. And the reason we had to do it is no one else believed that it would work. And then eventually we got to the point where we figured out that the right business model was to actually focus on licensing the inventions essentially through the standards bodies so that the entire market could play, instead of practicing the inventions ourselves. And then we would enable more market participants to enter into that by selling kind of enabling technology. So we do semiconductor chipsets and fairly large business doing that. So when we look at the company, we actually say, well, what are the 3 or 4 big technology trends that will happen? And let's see if we can enable 2 of them. We place 4 bets, but we hope that 2 hit. And if you have big enough ambitions, those 2 need to be able to cover the other that miss, essentially. And the business model that you select may not be known to you yet. But if you have the key scale and you're working on a big enough problem, then you have the optionality of selecting what your business model is. And that's what we've done as a company. We'll be almost 30 this year. We'll be 30 this year. And that's really what I meant to say by leaving your options open and being flexible with what you do. And in some cases, you may be better off changing your business model dramatically. So we, at the end of the 90s, we sold our handset business, we sold an infrastructure business, and I would expect us to be changing our business model as we go into these new areas like Ursula and Xerox are doing.
It's really interesting, if I can just add into that a little bit. We just sold a business as well that would be one that would be changed very significantly by technology, and we decided to sell it primarily because we couldn't invest enough money and didn't have the expertise to fundamentally change that business. We were too small.
IT
Yeah, the IT
outsourcing.
outsourcing business, too small. et cetera. But I want to go back to the beginning of Xerox. If you think about the innovation that happened with Xerox, one of it was, xerography, very famous. And we went out, or Chester Carlson went out with this amazing thing and couldn't get traction for 4 years. And he couldn't get traction until he innovated the business model. And the traction that he got was he tried to sell these machines to people, and they said, well, I don't think I want to buy them. So literally, he and some lawyers and they didn't know they were business process people then, but they were, said, how about changing the entire delivery model? How about renting these machines? And the entire model for how the copying business developed around the world was not only the xerography, it was literally this model that you buy by the drink. Without that change, this great innovation would have been trapped for many more years to come, right? And that's an important thing. That's one of the reasons why we're so on the think about it more broadly. It's not because we want to leave behind technology. Thing innovation, that's really important. But if all you do is that, then you're going to be lost. Telephone has the same story. All of these things have the same story of making sure that you think about how people will use what you do, what you have. And if you can't figure out a way to innovate how people use it, then you're not going to probably be successful.
Another question? Yeah, over here on the left. Or my left.
Hi. So I think, this is a question that maybe reflects, comes from the heart of someone who is a recent Stanford graduate and who's kind of stuck around the Bay Area. But how do you address the issue of recruiting young talent out of universities like Stanford when I think, speaking for a lot of people my age, there's a lot of excitement around new emerging companies, very small companies, startups, and the exciting opportunities, both at a personal, technical, and also from an equity compensation perspective. Like, how do you address competition against that? Thanks.
Steve, you want
to
to
start? I'll go. Yeah.
So, we actually do quite well recruiting certain people. Now, there are people that want a startup experience, and you're just not going to find that in a big company. But you will find other things that apply or resonate with a lot of other people. So we find that we're able to recruit people. Now, the market is the market, and people are going to pay for talent, and they're going to go to where talent is, and they're going to do all the market things. And big companies do the same thing. Interestingly, when we went into there's also a point where that changes, by the way, where people come and a bigger company actually has an advantage. And I'll give you an example, which is when we were moving into smartphones, one of the things that we had to get very, very good at was graphics. So graphics for the phone, which is the primary graphics or primary gaming platform today, is something we had to build up. We did not have that expertise, and we need to recruit people from that world. And what we found, we were very, very good at taking the employee that was newly married and just spent 5 years in the startup. So we had a lot of 29-year-old...
Without an equity event.
Right, and we used to ask them, what took you so long to get here? And they basically said, I was tired of living in this place, and then I got married, and now, And so we ended up getting a lot of talent that way. So you can kind of play on both sides, but...
If I add, it's interesting. My son, just for full disclosure, my son goes to school here. He's getting his PhD here. And one of the things that's really... And I'm on the board of 2 really old companies, in addition to my company, American Express and ExxonMobil. So these are ancient, people...
Historic,
right? And all 3 of these companies, very much like what Steve said, believe it or not, the world does not rotate around Stanford. There are other rotation points around the world. And I'm saying that with all due respect. Because when you get here, just like when I go to MIT, people actually believe that there's no other place that you can actually... Michigan has a good engineering school, MIT has a good school, Columbia has a good school. So the good news is there are lots of good schools. As Steve said, we can't screw this up because we recruit from all of them. People who have a certain bent, want to live in a certain type of area, you're not going to come to work for Xerox, very likely, but there are a lot of other people who will. And as far as compensation goes, Steve is right. You can't pay less. You can't, it's the market is the market, and it's very easy to find out what an electrical engineer gets paid in XYZ, cost of living adjusted. So there's not generally a pay barrier here. It's a lifestyle type barrier, and there's certain people who want to work in a company that's a little bit more established, and others who want to try to do the startup thing. And there is a time in life when taking 20 minutes to go 1 mile is no longer useful, right? You want to go to Toronto or wherever it is. Toronto is probably the same thing. You want to go to Michigan where it takes less time. So there's a whole bunch. People kind of move through their lives, and we try to capture them at every single point. We hire a fair number of Stanford grads and MIT grads, and we also hire Rensselaer grads and Michigan grads.
That's the other thing we do is, I think everybody does this, but you do an internship program
Yeah,
or
it's a big
co-op
deal for
program,
us.
and that essentially, people
Sort.
kind of select
Yeah.
both directions. So very, very high return on those programs.
Well,
And
you both have some schools that are relatively close by, for internships.
They're not bad,
and
yeah,
things.
not bad for internships.
So we actually only recruit from less than 20 schools, actually. And we did a lot of data matching, and we found out what actually works, and we just focus our firepower there.
Right.
And the technique tends to be get them early and get them introduced to the company, and if you can find a match, don't lose those people.
Don't lose them, exactly.
That's
That's
what
where
the
summer internships really,
And then you
really
take
help a
them
lot.
by the beach on the way back to the airport,
I
right?
tell you, what they work on is more important than where they sit, and
Big
they
deal.
really want to know that they're working on something that they can tell their parents or their family and say, hey, I did X.
Another question? Oh, right in the middle there.
Bias is generally unconscious, so how do you bring the unconscious to the conscious?
Data, facts and data. And I'm sorry for jumping on this one, but
Go.
we did this study at Xerox, high-level study. Now we're diving deep into it, and we looked at how many women we had at an entry-level Band B person and position. Amazing. We were at 50% of our entry-level Band B, so this is management people, were women. And then by the time you get to a A-level executive, we were down to 15%. These people, a lot of them are still in the company. So we, our people, who were very aware of the big push that we had on diversity and inclusion, we managed out 90% of these great people that we hired. So with the data, we were able to actually go back and understand, first of all, do a prospective look and make sure that we were asking 15, 20, 30 questions on why this woman couldn't do this job, and this was a particular woman thing. But also to actually become aware of the fact that we were actually acting this way. Because we are absolutely, we had decided these people were good enough to be an entry-level manager, and then progressively decided that they were worse than 50% of the men or 90% of the men that they were competing against. So either we were doing something wrong, judging wrong, training them wrong, whatever it is. And that's what so the first thing that we did was data, just to literally be really unforgiving about the facts, and just write them down. And then what you have to do is literally, the second thing is not move, make sure that you slow down action to the point of pain before they can actually make an easy decision on the option of a man. By the way, with that, you can't do that. We just didn't have enough women in certain positions where we could actually fill the job, but there were a lot of circumstances when we could, and so we were able to actually push that. Very few of the women, like I'll say none, fail. They fail about the same rate as a man fails. So this is literally about giving opportunity here and keep continuously looking at how are you behaving, how are you behaving, how are you behaving. I don't want anybody to have a frontal lobotomy when they walk in the company. You can be as biased as you want, but I want your actions to actually align with the direction of the company, and that's a big deal. So I'm not trying to change people's belief. I just want to make sure that we can enact the right set of policies, etc., enact action from the policies to make sure that we have the right outcome. Because we did do, for many years at Xerox, trying to do this kind of religious movement to get everybody to love each other and respect each other, and that's a good thing, but you can't ever test it unless you look at the results, and so that's what we do now. We look at the results.
What have you found about the support you might need to provide for women as they're having families? Because one of the things we've seen at Stanford Business School is, we all get our MBAs, we all go out in the workforce, and then, women are opting out for various reasons. How do you think a company like yours can help with that problem?
So I'm going to try to be as politically correct as possible. I think, we do everything that's standard to do. So you can leave for, 12 weeks, you name it. Every set of flexibilities that everybody has put in that's a physical set of, we got it. This is almost like changing your mindset as well, like I talked about. You don't have to get a frontal lobotomy. We're talking about very educated women. And I would say the first thing that has nothing to do with me, they have to talk to their husbands. And because generally they are married, right? So they've made an option. Their family set has made an option that I think is not, that I can't get in front of. So I want to make sure that women understand, that people understand that there's a man and a woman, they're both generally educated. The men have to do something. They have to step up here. I'm famous for saying the following, that I married a man 20 years older than I am. That solved all the problems in the world, right? Because by the time I had a baby, he was ready to retire, right? You can stay home. But and I say that in a way.
It's true.
All the
It's true.
structural things we're ready to do. We're gonna, we probably got it. But there's a set of choices that you say to yourself: why is it that 85 or 90% of the women choose to stay home? What is the men not capable? That's not so. So I say to all of us out there, as we're raising our children now, or influencing your grandkids, make sure that the male grandkids understand that they have a really important parenting job that could be traded off with a woman's parenting role.
You must have just heard the lecture that I gave to my son,
Okay.
so that's perfect. Well, I want to thank both of you for spending some time with us today. I want to thank the audience for your participation.
Thank you.